Hello, everyone. Great to have you here in the room. Please have a seat. Feel welcome. There is some coffee and drinks you can also bring with you. And welcome to everyone online. Pleasure to have you with us. My name is Bahar. I'm the Global Head of Sustainable Transformation at EQT, a purpose-driven global investment organization. This year, we are proud to celebrate 3 decades of developing companies. EQT have grown into a global leader in private capital, managing over 246 billion assets under management. Through our investments, we support 300 companies, collectively employing over 750,000 people globally. As investors, our mandate is, of course, to maximize returns for our clients. But we seek to do that in a way that it also benefits the social and environmental and our planet. And why do we do that? We do that because we believe that doing good is really good business. And we are taking this very seriously. We have a very strong commitment to climate. We were one of the first private market firms in the world to sign up for science-based targets. And today, 57% of our invested equity is aligned and validated science-based targets. But today's session and the hour to come, we will discuss the urgent need to accelerate change towards net zero, leaving no one behind. The private sector has a significant role to play to build a fair, inclusive future for everyone. And central to our discussion today will be the concept of just transition, developed by the trade union or trade movement to protect workers' rights and secure livelihood as we shift to a more sustainable economy. Against this backdrop, we are really thrilled to have Sharon Burrell, who brings a wealth of experience on labor and social justice with us today. Cheryl is a former General Secretary of the International Trade Federation. She has a huge engagement in policy, both on UN level, in Davos, in G7, and in ILO. After Sharon's keynote, I will invite an amazing panel to discuss this together with us. But maybe before handing over to Sharon, I would like to take a chance to say a few words about how EQT works with this topic. Beyond our own employees, we influence the businesses we own and the 750,000 employees they have together. While we are not operational as investors, we influence these businesses. And we influence their trajectory to the future. And I would like to give you some examples on how we do that. We encourage all the companies we own to measure and increase their employee engagement. Nearly 90% of our companies do that today and have a great process behind it. We have a very strong uptake in APAC across the portfolio there. And we have, across all geographies, overperforming the benchmarks in the industries. If we also reflect about us as a role as an investor, we invest behind businesses delivering sustainable services and sustainable solutions, also contributing to a just transition. We invest in improving energy infrastructure across and access to clean and affordable energy across the world. We support transition to low carbon technologies. We invest in public and sustainable transformation, transport, and we improve digital connectivity, just to name some few of those things that we invest behind. We invest from very small companies and startups to mature companies, and we hope to drive transition and transformation across all of them to create jobs and support a greener economy. With all of that said, there is still a gap. And we have to close that gap. And that's essential for driving the change we're looking into. We are severely off track as a society to realize the 2030 agenda. As many of you know here, around these tables, 17% and only 17% of the SDGs have been achieved so far. That is really worrying. So I'm now looking forward to a conversation that is solution-oriented and give us some hopes on how we drive this transformation together and the next phase. With that, and I hope you're online, Sharon, I will give the stage to Sharon Burlow to join us from Australia. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you very much, and I'm deeply regretful that I'm not with you this afternoon. But I must say, looking at the opening statements from the presidency, we are indeed off track. Let me congratulate you on the ethics on the basis of which your investment impact is delivered. We know that once we get to that tipping point, I think you said you're at 50% of alignment with science-based targets, then in fact that means that the companies you invest in have to be aligned with that future that we need in terms of climate action. But that's one part of the picture. It's an essential part, and we need to reform all of the finance sector to deliver not just on those conditional elements of climate action, but also to look to the areas of people and nature. If we don't put climate, people and nature at the heart of the business model, then in fact we will not reach the speed and scale that is vital. There are many companies who still say they depend on government. They want government to fund initiatives. They want government to buy down the risk, or more recently, philanthropy to buy down the risk. That's not the kind of business model that we need. I understand risk management. I indeed sit on a number of boards where we are dealing with investing in renewables and trying to influence the market for community support, for affordability and electrification, and of course, for my passion for workers and just transition. But that alone is not going to do it. You see the fights already and the old tactics being used at Baku to actually put things back into the negotiation frame, to say that it's not clear, to delay the process, as well as indeed the elements that the previous panel discussed, which is to allow those who are opponents to dominate the COP without identification. We need to know that the world is on track, and we need to put the trust of people back at the heart of that. That's what just transition is about. We can tell you what it will take for workers where they're displaced, but equally, as much as we need secure pensions, as we need indeed that bridge to secure pensions for early retirees, for younger workers, the support for income and redeployment and reskilling to make that possible. We also need reinvestment in communities, because you can transition workers out of fossil fuels or other vulnerable industries, but you need to transition them in to the clean economy of the future. So investing in those clean production or mining, or indeed upstream or downstream support through logistics, supply chains, these elements of the job are critical. But so too is investing in resilience, which of course is where people are at the heart of the demands around questions of health, increasingly indeed made more difficult to control from pollution and the impact of extreme weather events. So when you look back to the origins of Just Transition, yes, I'm proud to say it was the Labor movement who actually recognised that there are no jobs on a dead planet and fought for Just Transition to give workers hope that they would have secure jobs for themselves and their children and their grandchildren into the future in new clean energies. But we also recognise that this has to be done on a justice basis, that climate justice is critical. And therefore, in the preamble of the Paris Climate Agreement is a commitment to just transition and workers, but also is a commitment to human rights. And people forget that, and you cannot look at one without the other. And now as we see rights ascribed to nature, on which business is in fact dependent, more than 50% of our GDP is directly related to natural services. So the more we continue to destroy nature, the more we put our lives, our health, our jobs, our economies, and most of all, our security for a common future at risk. Therefore, today, just transition has to be at the heart. And if we want to think about it very differently, particularly in the context of declining democracy, and for most of us, democracy is still the best system we have, with all of the flaws associated. There's no doubt that when people can actually control the vote for their leaders, can actually hold their leaders to account, then we have a fighting chance. But as we see democratic spaces close down, then we must recognise that we need a new generation of social licence, one that actually puts just transitions at the heart through co-creation of our future in terms of everybody being involved in what it will take to deploy the speed and scale of a transition to net zero, but with security for people and indeed with preservation and repair of nature. This has to shift the business model. And if we're talking about co-creation, then we need to say, what does that look like? Well, when you're transitioning from one industry, one set of industries that can no longer be in existence because of their climate emissions or because of their dependence on natural resources that simply aren't there, then we must look to the last COP. It wasn't easy, but those three areas that should indeed, as one of your previous panellists said, make up the core of NDCs are to treble renewable energy, to move away from fossil fuels, and to deploy just transition at its heart. But there was another agreement last year, and that was, in fact, the agreement to end deforestation by 2030, to repair and rebuild nature in terms of a future that we can feel is genuinely on the right path to sustainability. So let me finish by saying, if we want to build democratic legitimacy from the community up, if we want that people will grow trust in our institutions and governments that is faltering, if not failed today, then we need to make sure that people are at the heart of that. And that will take not just a commitment, indeed, to co-creation, not just the social legitimacy of building a new generation of social licence where people feel confident because they've been involved, and of course with community benefits, particularly for our Indigenous communities who around the world own the land that we need to actually work with, and to see indeed them as equity or joint venture partners. But we need to look at how communities can feel that the benefits of today will continue to flow to them to build tomorrow. In order to do that, we need to tweak the DNA of the finance sector. Your values and conditionality, you'd have to say, absolutely. That's a great foundation. But I can tell you that startup industries, even with proven technology that will grow to the 5 billion, 50 billion, whatever industries of the future, find it very hard in many countries to get appropriate finance, whether it's debt venture funds, whether it's patient capital through concessional loans, whatever it might be, even our capital, workers' capital that's indeed invested through our pension funds, even those funds, by and large, are constrained by a legislative frame that is part of a dominant financial system geared for an old economy. So we need to look at a range of different options. And let me finish by saying we also have to recognise that the dominant energy markets aren't going to be fit for purpose for tomorrow's energy either alone. We need those, we need the companies, we need the renewable energy companies, and we need a stable market with indeed smart grids. But we also need to recognise that now with renewable energy, you can have individual producers. You can have community co-ops that are producers providing services and indeed investing in community batteries. You can have major buildings with body corporates, residential buildings and commercial buildings, where the management of those buildings is actually transforming the energy. And of course, we must have rules that say there can be no new builds with fossil fuels. I would simply caution us that even as we deal with the current transition out of coal, we will come to the point where demand slumps for traditional fossil fuels, particularly gas, somewhere in the 40s. And in that context, the just transition and the rebuilding through reinvestment in those communities will be equally as tough. So let's get it right now. Let's recognise if you put climate, yes, absolutely. Climate action, that is reduction of emissions, getting us to net zero and indeed to real zero, but also people, secure jobs, secure communities, shared community benefit, and indeed nature at the heart of our business models, then we will in fact re-establish trust, build social legitimacy through that new generation of social licence where just transition is assured, and we will stabilise the planet for future generations. This is now urgent, it's essential, we're beyond time, and we have to actually make sure that the rules of the game shift in order to give us a fighting chance.
You can't probably see or hear the big applause, but thank you for joining us. A really pleasure to have you, and thank you for being a part of this conversation. Getting this done, I think, is a good bridge to the conversation we're having now. Please help me welcome Ann Rosenberg, Karin Svensson, and Catherine Sedulka. I am not sure we are using this, so let's put them down for now. Good. So, very short introduction of my great panel. Ann Rosenberg, founder and board member of UN Global Compact SDGs for All, also now engaged in the new initiative UN Digital Compact that we will talk much more about. Karin Svensson, Chief Sustainability Officer for Volvo Group. Great to have you here. And Catherine Sedulka, you are partner at Systemic and chair of Blended Finance. So we will come through all the conversations here. Sharon's talked really much about the interlink between energy, climate, nature, human rights, and a just transition. And she ended, I love her ending, saying, now time to do something. Let's think, get things done. And what's your reflection hearing her?
I think in her wonderful talk, there is one word that will be probably one of the most used words going forwards, and that's the word trust. So you will see the next couple of years that people will begin to change their titles, and trust will be in that title. In 2015, when the 17 Global Goals came out, we were queuing up to give commitments, huge transitions. This is 9 years ago. And now it's time that we actually are transforming things. And if we don't, the people that she talked about will begin to lose the trust in us. So I think the people of the world are expecting that all the commitment given by CEO, by government leaders, what we talk about, and all the COPs that we have been through during the last couple of years, that there begin to be actions behind it. And when you do talk about transition that she mentions, You need to bring the people with you and don't leave them behind. And that is exactly what UN is saying, that the new world that we are creating, a better world, is a world for the people. And if we don't do that, they will lose the trust in us. And that's the essence of what we need to do.
I love
trust.
that. And if we jump to you, Catherine, so we don't take the road, what's your reflection on Sharon, also from a financial perspective?
Yeah, well, it's such a privilege to be anywhere near Sharon because she's an Aussie icon and I'm an Australian as well. And I come from Australia's biggest coal mining state. And so Sharon and I have often had this conversation, not only about people who have lost trust, and they have lost trust that this transition will benefit them, but also that there's real fear. If there's not a clear plan for the transition, if there's not clarity on how to do the upskilling, not just the exit from an industry, of course you have people digging in and not understanding that this green transition is actually one which will not reinforce existing inequalities, but actually tackle some of them. And because you mentioned finance, I just have to say the other big reflection I have is that Sharon's right. There are regulations which prevent institutional capital from investing in emerging markets, in infrastructure, in just transition. You've got less than 10% in Europe of pension portfolios going into emerging markets where a lot of the just transition assets will sort of make a big difference. And I think when we look at the rules, we need to also ensure that a just transition lens is clear. Otherwise, we're not going to be unlocking the capital to the right places.
True. Karin, your reflection from Sharon's speech.
Yeah. First of all, I think coming back a little bit to what you said, I think we saw maybe 5 years ago lots and lots of companies and governments making big, setting big ambitions for the future. And I think that one of the reasons why we're now seeing maybe not companies backing off, but at least being a little bit more cautious is just because of the things that Sharon was talking about, that this is super complex, because what might be good for climate might not be good for people or for the nature. So I think it's not only because we don't want, I think it's also because it's very, very difficult to do these things. So to start talking about this is of absolute essence if we are to get people with us on this transition. And maybe we will then see, I actually wrote down Chief Trust Officer. So we'll see if that will happen in a couple of years.
Thank you. And if we go back to you, I mean, we've been discussing the interlink between sustainability and digital for many, many years. And now UN is launching this digital compact, and you are very much engaged in that. Tell us a bit more about it.
So this COP29 is taking place the year where the 22nd of September at Climate Week in New York at UN, that the digital compact was agreed by member states. And note that down, because that is going to change everything. So why is that? So when the 17 global goals came out in 2015, there was no technology framework behind it. It was ambitions, a lot of KPIs, a lot of attentions, a lot of great things that we're going to do. And we all, as you said, we are committed to this. But it's difficult. And we know that digitalization is key for what we are doing. So for years, UN have been working on the Digital Compact, which is a framework about digitalization to lead with impact and purpose and climate change. Part of that is AI for good, responsible AI. So all of that whole framework is going to help us to do this transition. So I am absolutely so optimistic that now we have the tool, the framework, and what we can do. So I think the Digital Compact will lead us the way. So for me, this COP is another kind of conversation because we have a strong technology push from UN and they are leading the way.
And I love your enthusiasm and your positivity around this. Will this only help the developed world? Or will we really bring everyone with us and no one lives behind?
So this is what I think is the uniqueness, because when the Digital Compact came out, the whole framework is, of course, for all member states, but it has a dedicated focus on Global South. So the work group that I'm part of with ITU, just to give one example, because there are many work groups, and they welcome everybody to be part of the work groups, is that we are building an AI solution for governments and for public sector. And this is all best practices, use cases, education, learning that you can adapt and use. So I inspire everybody to go in to be part of those work group, whatever it is in the finance sector, whatever kind of industry it is. And UN, again, like they did with the 17 global goals, is convening all of us to share the best solutions for technology, but with a very strong focus on Global South. But of course, the solution is for everybody. Yeah.
That's amazing. And Karin, I'm thinking Volvo Group, technology and sustainability is very intertwined and interlinked. What does just transition mean in your world?
I think, first of all, it actually means the same thing for us as for anyone else.
Yep.
I think it means that we should leave no one behind. I think it means that we want to transition into sustainable transportation, and we need to do that not at the expense of anyone, but bringing everyone with us. Having that said, and maybe I should just share a couple of numbers about the Volvo Group, which could set this into context. So, as at least some of you probably knows, Volvo Group is one of the world's largest manufacturers of commercial vehicles, trucks, buses, construction equipment, etc. We have 100,000 employees in 55 countries. We are selling our products in 190 countries. And we produce them in 18 countries, and we have 50,000 suppliers. And I'm mentioning these numbers not because I want to brag, but just because of the fact that doing a just transition is quite difficult when you're present everywhere, and it's challenging. So I think for us, it really means that we need to understand the impact we have on our own employees, but also on people upstream in our supply chain and downstream, customers and the greater community that we influence while we're doing business. But if I start a little bit with our own people, then the 100,000 employees, I think so far we actually been able to have quite a limited impact on our own workforce. And I think that is out of two reasons. One is that we have had a very open dialogue around this transition, what it means for us as a company, and made it into a very positive thing. To have a shared vision with all employees and have a very close dialogue, I think, is sort of the basics. The other thing is that we have done upskilling, we have done reskilling. If you look upon, if we produce an electric truck, we do that at the same line as we produce a diesel truck. So there hasn't been a big change for the workforce in that sense. Then, of course, it's important for us to keep the workforce skilled enough to be able to continue this. If I talk a little bit where we actually need to focus a lot is on the supply chain when it comes to a just transition, looking into what kind of impact it will actually have on the supply chain from a job perspective, but also things like when we go electric, we will have a need of materials and minerals that could be a shortage of, but also where we know that we have issues from not the least the human rights perspective, but also from an environmental perspective.
And what's the key learnings? I mean, you have a lot of programs and a lot of efforts, and you have a very global outreach.
I think the key learning for us is that we need much more transparency throughout the value chain that we don't have today. But it's also that we need to work very closely with all the suppliers that we do have. So we are putting, of course, requirements on our suppliers, but we're also talking about what kind of aspirations do we have and that we want to share with them, where we would like to see action from their side with regards to people, resources, climate, but also when it comes to business conduct. So, and I think what we need to do is to work very closely together in partnership with our suppliers on these issues.
Yeah, and are they engaging with you? Do they see the same urgency and the same way that you do?
I would say yes, but then it's a very general answer for all of these suppliers.
Yeah.
I think what is important is that we have a risk-based approach. So we have certain commodities or materials where we have more risks, and also we have certain countries, of course, where we have bigger risks. So we are trying to work as good as possible on these things.
Yeah, true. Catherine, you're the chair of Blended Finance Task Force. How much is that needed to address some of the challenges we just discussed? And what's the role they should play?
Yeah, we do a lot of dialogue. You mentioned the word dialogue. We have a lot of dialogue with public, private, and philanthropic capital, trying to understand what role finance can play in accelerating the just transition. Before I explain that, I just want to acknowledge the unbelievable humility, Karen, of your comments just now. It's so rare that people can say where we're still learning what's working and what's not. And I do think when we're talking about the just transition, unless we come with that humility, that openness, that willingness to have dialogue, we're never going to solve this. So thank you for that. That's very rare on a COP panel that people are so humble. So thank you. And maybe my contrast is having conversations with some of the big institutional investors. They don't always come with that humility, because I do feel that people think just transition is sometimes one more thing that they then have to grapple with. You may know that less than 10% of the Climate Action 100 plus companies have any sort of just transition plan. Less than 3% of that 10% have done that plan with any stakeholder consultation, so they're probably not very good plans. And less than 1% have any KPIs. And so it's sort of, people can have big visions and plans, but I think what we're seeing, especially amongst the financial community, is a sense of being overwhelmed with how they integrate these topics, a lack of clarity on the metrics for what a just transition might look like, and then sometimes a confusion around the expectation of the different roles of different parts of the capital stack. And so when we think about blended finance, we should really break down what the role is of a public investor, a World Bank, a multilateral development bank, versus a philanthropy who could maybe help with some of the community rehabilitation work, versus corporates who might really create value out of the skills building and understanding their sort of supply chain transformation. And so right now, my role is often trying to translate this sense of you need to finance a just transition, translate that into day-to-day portfolio activities, and also an understanding of the different partners that could help.
That's great. And Karen, do you experience something similar? Do you experience that there is a lack of transparency, a lack of clear expectations
From
different stakeholders to drive this transition?
I would say yes, and I very much recognize what you're saying, that this is just one more thing. So, okay, now we've had all the climate ambitions. Are we now to have more ambitions? And it feels like we're adding on ambitions to this, even though they're actually very much tightly connected. So, yes, I do recognize that.
Yeah. And what's your reply on that? One more thing we're adding on, now also working from a UN perspective into this.
I think there is a fundamental thing here, because, and I think that's what leaders, whatever your head of state, ministers, or a CEO, are waking up to now, is that it's not just one more thing. You cannot sign out of this. It's not going to disappear. It's not just about a new strategy. This here will stay here until we transform. And that's why I love that we talked about the trust, because what happens when you don't deliver? You begin to, your image of the company, you will damage your reputation, it will damage the revenue. So there's a wake-up call happening right now. So it is not one more thing. It is literally a transition that do need to take place. But I do think, and I'm very optimistic, and I also feel it being here in Baku, at COP29, is that people are beginning to realize it. People are going to realize that they cannot say, oh, we're not going to fulfill those ambitions. People are beginning to do much more public-private partnership. Public-private partnership was something we talked about could be great to do, but it's happening now.
And Catherine, what do we need to remove in terms of barrier to increase that public-private partnership, to increase the finance and accelerate that?
It's a great question. I think the first thing is this transparency that we've talked about, who's doing what. When you look at South Africa's Just Energy Transition Partnership, which was an $8 billion commitment from some donor governments, which was meant to then crowd in private investment into transition infrastructure in South Africa. And the South African pavilion's over there, so hello, any South Africans who've migrated over. But this Just Energy Transition Partnership, I believe, was fundamentally challenged because there was that lack of transparency about what donors were doing when they were committing funds and where it was going and where it was coming from. If you look at the unbelievable consultation that the South Africans did, particularly the Presidential Climate Commission, around this just transition, that sense of connecting communities who are affected into the finance that was then flowing to grid infrastructure, to clean energy, and to some of the coal transition activities, that was where we started to see a breakthrough. So I think sort of transparency around where money is flowing would help, because one of the big barriers to a just transition is where communities feel like this is being done to them rather than with or by. And that will always frustrate progress, because if something's being done to you, of course, you are going to find that pretty challenging and deeply, deeply unfair.
Karen, do you have any examples of that kind of partnership in Volvo where you think this partnership have been the foundation for us to be able to scale this?
We do lots and lots of partnerships. We do partnerships, of course, on the technology side, and we do partnerships for both because this whole transition is very complex. It takes lots of time and it's very costly. So therefore, we do lots of partnerships. No specific partnerships I can think of when it comes to the just transition. Probably that's something where we could do even a bit more on that side. Of course, on the supplier side, we do lots of partnerships also, where, for example, where we are looking into new types of materials that we will need. As an example that we like to take is, of course, the one we have with the Swedish steel manufacturers, SSAB, where we are working together with them, where we are... When we went into this partnership, we weren't sure exactly what would happen. They had an idea about how to do fossil-free steel. We had a need of getting fossil-free steel. We were both willing and able to take a bit of risk, and we decided to do this partnership. And just within a couple of years, we were actually able to deliver a vehicle done in fossil-free steel. And today, we have it in any truck of ours. If you buy an electric truck, you get certain parts in fossil-free steel. And I think what this shows is that what we did is that we use our purchasing power. We say that we are willing to say, even though we don't know exactly how this will play out, we will still buy a certain percent at a certain time. And I guess that's what we need to do in all of this, that we need to be willing to take a bit of a risk without knowing exactly where we will end on these things. So I think that could be a way. Then, of course, we are doing partnerships when it comes to training and education. We do partnerships when it comes to vocational training, which is a very important thing for us. We know that there is a big lack of both driver and mechanics, and we know that transportation is just crucial to any type of society. So we do lots of work, especially in Africa, Middle East, and now also at Balkan, to educate not the least women in these areas. And approximately 80% of these people that go through these vocational trainings that we do in cooperation with different types of government agencies get a job. Most probably not with us, but with some company that supports the transport industry. So that's maybe a good example of a partnership to do this transition. If I ask you to zoom out and now become this chief trust officer of the future, you know, this is my first COP, and I've been having wonderful conversation with a lot of people, and everyone comes with these great ideas. There is a lot of innovation, there is a lot of hope, there is a lot of willingness, and still we are not moving fast enough. So now, as the new trust chief officer, what do we need to do to accelerate this? Who wants to go first?
So it will happen with the trust. It is already happening.
It's growing on us.
It's already happening.
It's growing on us. Yes.
A good friend of me have had that side now for 2 years, and it is happening. So I think why I'm very optimistic, and I talked about the digital compact, and I talked about the role UN have in this, is that we are seeing like the World Bank and the Development Bank and EQT, and we are seeing that the money is floating the right places. We are seeing that the private sector, I was working 21 years for SAP, and I'm now part of a company called Seabrain, And I can see that there's been a maturity for the big technology companies to go in and work with the UN, to go and work with the World Bank, to go into Global South, but it's becoming more normality. It's not like, because you buy from me to do a big digital transformation project, I also expect you actually pay. No, it can actually be that the money come from a grant, or it come from like some kind of like World Bank or an investment or so on. So you begin to see these new kind of structures around how we together can lift and transform. So, and I see that more and more and more. So I will say the trust officer, the role of that is to make sure that the people, the trust in the company, the trust in the brands is fulfilling what the original promised when they started the journey, right? And then, of course, we have all the regulations, because the regulations will be more and more and more. I come from Europe. We see it there, but you see it more in the United States, all of the world. So there is also the whole thing about the regulation, that we're fulfilling the regulation. Remember, the regulations are not there to be bad against us. They're there to help us, motivate us, move us in the right direction. So as a trust officer, I think that person will be the one that will be the best friend of the CEO of the company, to make sure that what she promised actually fulfills in a strong public-private partnerships. So nothing happens to the image, the revenue, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that what we do need to accelerate the transformation in all of these perspectives is to have much more of a system perspective of things. We cannot, we just need to accept the fact that this is very, very complex. So the only way forward is to understand how the system works, that this is an ecosystem that needs to move in sync, both when it comes to what we do, but also when we do things. So working together for me is the only solution, and there we need to be willing to share much more of our plans in a much more transparent way than we normally do, to be able to hook into each other in a good way.
But is that the only barrier?
Sorry?
Is the lack of transparency the only barrier to do exactly what you said?
No, I think it's not only the lack of transparency, it's also a lack of trust, but it's also a lack of maybe perspective. Everyone sits in their own box and thinks that this is, from my perspective, this is how things looks like. And but I think we are starting to understand a bit better how we are impacting each other, and that we can use that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've just had my promotion. I'm the Chief Trust Officer. Thank you so much. And I think the first thing I would do is make the business case for the just transition, because I think you're right. It's not just transparency. It's not just trust. It's not just sitting in my silos with my day job. It's that we still don't know just how, I think you said it, Anne, actually, that what happens if you don't do this.
Yep.
They've done some analysis that says the delays alone of not having enough green skilled workers is going to increase temperatures by 0.1 degrees every 5 years.
Yep.
So the impact, the implications of not having a just transition, they put the world on fire, and they will cost everybody. They will have a big cost. And so I think I would sort of start with the business case almost of why we need to do this, why we need to do it now, why we need to do it with that very strong sort of consultation, high trust model. And I would probably, in my promoted role, I would probably put different people as decision makers. I think so often this point of someone's having something done to them, a different form of accountability, representation, and engagement is so urgently needed on this agenda.
I love it. You took the promotion really well, I think. And if I now, except promoting you to the Chief Trust Officer, also give you magical power. And the last round I would like your perspective on is, if you had magic power, if you could change one thing, and it doesn't need to be within your company, it could be like really take the big picture, not saving the world, but more concrete than that. What would that be? That really would transform or unlock or create a system change. Now is your chance.
Okay, you said not world peace. If I could, I would, of course, take away all the climate issues that we do have today. But if I can't do that, I think what I would wish for is really to have much more of a unified, solution-driven dialogue. A dialogue that can coordinate our action, that can replace, I think, what is very much hindering us today, which is a very polarized dialogue that rather divides than unites us, so that we can tackle all of these challenges together.
I love that.
Magic powers, what would I do? I would educate every girl who isn't educated. We educate women, we solve this.
And then we solve this.
I'm a science fiction writer, and I will activate the sci-fi in every single person in the world, but with the good sci-fi, because there can be bad sci-fi, right? We are living at a moment where we have technology at hands that is unbelievable. We have an unbelievable opportunity. We have now been more global, more united, in exceptional worlds, right? I live in LA, and I see driverless cars is just a normal thing. Robots on the street. That was one of the reasons why I moved to LA, because I needed a moment of the sci-fi, but I needed all over the world. So I want people to, instead of feeling that this is just one more transformation program, this is one more regulation, change your mind and think about what an opportunity. You live in this world, hopefully many times, but maybe only one time, we don't know. But what can I do? Empower yourself. So my biggest wish is that people look at this journey as something magical. And then activate, if you're a sci-fi lover, activate that in yourself. That is what I would suggest.
I love it. Thank you so much. And I think with all that accumulated knowledge, input, and experience, we will get things done. I'm really sure about that. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for being part of this. Wish you a great day, and let's continue the conversation.